This is a missional moment. Something is happening. More people are coming to church. That means we're going to be discipling those people.
There's too many people needing to be discipled than to do the disciple. There is a discipleship deficit.
Discipleship has always been challenging. How would you disciple a lot of young men in a really chaotic culture?
It does raise questions around discipleship in the immediate, where people are coming to faith in the immediate moment, and what does the long journey of walking alongside people who are coming to faith in this moment. Hello and welcome. My name is Jo Frost, here with my co-host Peter Lynas. This is Being Human. We are continuing our journey of looking at some of the big cultural storylines and shifts, things that we and hopefully other people are noticing and seeing. We're unpacking those storylines, looking behind the headlines, seeing what the underlying trends are, the news behind the news. And then we ask the question, how are these storylines reflected in the God story, the big story of God and humanity told throughout the pages of the Bible? Some of you keen beans might have noticed that we've been sketching out a larger arc of the God story over the episodes. Genesis, as we look at chaos and crisis; Exodus, as we unpack themes around freedom; Exiles and the Prophets, as we explore the vibe shift; and then the Gospels in the last episode, as we look at living in a missional moment. And we're going to continue that arc today as we dig into practices and life within the early church. And as I said, we're going to finish up with some practices, asking how are we going to reorientate our focus back towards the person of Jesus and live out our response to him and his acts of dying on the cross and being raised to life on a daily basis. So this week, Peter, we are looking at the discipleship deficit.
Yes,
what
we
are we talking about and why are we talking about it?
The last couple of episodes, we've been exploring these themes. We built up to the missional moment that we're in. We're saying, look, the stats, the stories that we're hearing suggest this is a missional moment. Something is happening. More people are coming to church, particularly young men, but not exclusively. That means we're going to be discipling those people. I mean, the whole idea is that we're making disciples, and there is the potential for a discipleship deficit because we know the generations ahead are thinner, if you like. And so there are less people around. And some of these people are coming in from significant way outside faith, and their journey in is really interesting. We might talk more about that, but all of that could lead to discipleship deficit because they're not journeying within church and then becoming Christians, as has traditionally been the way where we've seen loads of young people do that, kind of under 18s. So there could be a challenge ahead. It's a fantastic opportunity. That's the big frame, but there could be challenges within that.
I love that. I think that idea of deficit in two forms. The idea that there are literally a deficit, numerical deficit. There are more people coming in than are already there, and therefore the balance is wrong. There's too many people needing to be discipled than to do the discipling, those of us that are further along on the journey towards Jesus. So that's a deficit. But I also wonder whether or not there is this kind of disconnect between how the church is used to discipling people coming into faith and currently the needs of the people coming into church. Culture has always been at odds with what the church says the good life looks like and what it means to be human and what it means to live a good, a full and abundant life. We are formed wonky within our culture, and we always have been. But the wonky that the church is used to having to deal with is different to the wonky that seems to be coming in now. And that is because of some of the cultural storylines that we have been talking about over the last few episodes. So you're going to make us go back and talk about my favourite topic with my favourite heading. Why are we going back to talk about vibe shift yet again, Peter?
Because it's brilliant, because I love it, because it annoys you, but also because, so the thing about the vibe shift is it keeps on shifting. The vibe shift is not static. So it's not as deep a sort of structural or institutional change. It is a vibe, it's a sentiment, it's an emotion, it's a feeling. So it can shift in different directions and it can shift really quickly. So there's a Saturday Night Live skit about gay adoption, and Don Draper, John Hamm, and it's basically a skit, the comedy sketch. If you're not familiar with Saturday Night Live, there's a gay couple and then there's two heterosexual couples. And they're kind of like, but how did you adopt? And they keep saying, oh, how dare you? Like, you're so pejorative about it. it's a fairly funny, I think, sketch, but the point is that they're prepared to make it, and that leading actors like him are prepared to be in this sketch that is essentially mocking gay surrogacy and gay adoption. Um, and again, that's a reflection of the shift we have had in the UK recently at this very significant Supreme Court decision about what is a woman. I don't think that decision would have been made in the same way even a couple of years ago, and I don't think the reaction would have been the same as it is to it now, which is largely saying actually this was necessary, and the BBC and the main news outlets were fairly kind of positive and engaging on it. I mean, there's questions I might have at times, but fundamentally it is shifting in that way. The piece I'd say the other way is so Donald Trump is a key element of this vibe shift. The presumption was in Canada and Australia there are elections coming up, and the thought was that the more conservative parties would win. There's a guy Pulliver in Canada and Dutton in Australia. What is actually happening is, in some sense, in response against Trump, is that it looks like the more left of centre parties are actually going to win, and they looked like they were going to get hammered only a few months ago. So this is where the vibe shift keeps on shifting, and we need to be alert to that because culture is just all over the place.
Yeah, because when we were discussing the vibe shift a couple of episodes ago, and we were asking, is this not just merely a shift to the right? Is that what this vibe shift is moving us to? And yet, a number of commentators are pointing out that the Trump effect has actually been to re-energize and re-engage a more centre-left movement. Carney, I mean, the Liberals in Canada were dead and buried in December, and now it looks like Mark Carney's going to win by a landslide. That is really, really interesting. Similar things are happening in different spaces. We're having more conversations at the moment about whether or not we want to be closer to Europe than we have had the space to have those sort of conversations for years. This pendulum swing of public opinion that used to take a few years or even a few decades to pull backwards and forwards seems to be veering left and right and forwards and backwards and all sorts of different directions really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's causing a whole load of questions, because how does the church respond to people who are changing their minds on issues every second day?
Absolutely. Look, I think I want to say that the woman court ruling is really interesting again in the UK because it was a group of people of the left brought that case, and it's way more complex than left and right.
And it's another example of the changing of the mind. So 1 minute you're having Sir Keir Starmer, RPM, having to tie himself in knots over the definition of a woman, because we never ask what a man is. We have to ask what a woman is. And he's like, well, the vast majority and 99% of all women have a cervix and all the rest of it. And now he's able to turn around. Recent times, number 10 spokesperson says a woman is a biologically sexed female. So he has changed, and he's saying, I've always believed this. And you're like, well, if you believed it before, why didn't you say it before? And so it feels like either people are just at one point or another lying, or at one point or another really legitimately changing their mind depending on what it seems like everybody else is saying. And at what point do you get turn around and say, these are just emperor new clothes arguments, and everybody is just going along with what everybody else is saying at the time? Or is there something more fundamental, which means that we don't know what we think about a lot of things, and so we're constantly changing our mind? And at that point, then the question for me becomes, how do the words of faith, the seeds of faith, the seeds of God's word take root in somebody who's constantly pulling up all their knowledge, all their understanding, all their worldviews, and replanting new ones every time? It gets messy.
Absolutely, it does get messy. So we want to pull two threads out of that vibe shift keeps on shifting, if you like. One, I want to head into an academic direction for a second, because the other is around, particularly if young men are coming to faith, and we know that young men are more right of centre on all the stats. That has an implication that we want to come to in a minute on the stats. But the academic is interesting because this guy, George Yancey, who on Twitter was just saying, Okay, so the vibe shift has kind of impacted media, and that has shifted. It's more decentralized. You've got social media, yeah, you've got media institutions. You've got Joe Rogan is bigger than NBC, he was saying, or BBC here in a sense in his listenership. Um, but he said, what about the arts and what about academia? And he didn't know as much about the arts, but his point in academia where he worked, he said, look, that is much slower to change. That has rules and institutions and things. So there's a big fight at the minute between the Trump administration and Harvard and lots of US universities pulling their funding, trying to change them. His point is that's going to take a lot longer. There's a guy called Gramsci, and he was very intentional 50, 60 years ago, saying there was a long march through the institutions to try and change their mindset. And I think that was successful. And I think George Yancey is right to say it's way harder to change the academic institutions. That will take way longer. And so this vibe shift again might not take as much effect as we think because the academic institutions are way more powerful and structured and institutionalized than the vibe shift, and they might outlast it. So we need to be alert that this shift is not, again, necessarily only going one way.
And so if the vibe shifts are so precarious, and if they are quite fragile at the moment, as we lean towards one direction, but we've got institutions or other estates that may be pulling us back or course correcting or putting in the counterweight and the counter argument, it does raise questions around what does discipleship in the immediate, where people are coming to faith in the immediate moments, and what does the long journey of walking alongside people who are coming to faith in this moment? Because we are seeing spiritual openness at the moment, that we are seeing people shifting, asking questions, being curious, being open. We are hearing stories and stats about people being open to exploring faith. But it isn't just Christianity that people are exploring. One day they may come into the church, and the next day they may go to a mosque, and they are open to all things. And again, that raises massive questions about how does the church community support and disciple people who are shifting.
Yeah, and if your gateway drug is Jordan Peterson, and we know he is, like it's kind of a joke, but like lots of people do reference Peterson in their journey in. He's a follower of Carl Jung, a psychologist who loved his archetypes, his frames, and he could adopt from other places. So he would say, "Oh, Christianity's got an interesting frame, an archetype. We'll take that one." But they saw religion. He would have seen religion and Christianity as instrumental, a means to an end, something you could borrow from and take from, rather than the end in itself that you would give your whole life towards. And so, to some extent, Peterson does a version of that too. Well, that this could be a helpful thing. And so, young men may be attracted to that. So, one of the challenges we have is we know that more young people are engaging in church and in faith and in all spirituality. We know that some of the ways they're coming in are interesting. Jordan Peterson. We also see other more difficult characters like an Andrew Tate in that space, and you see Joe Rogan and various people. And I'm not commenting on their personal faith, but they are opening doorways to faith. But they're also seeing faith as an instrument, a useful means. And so all of that leads to a set of challenges. It is radically different to think about what do a group of young men, 18, 19-year-olds who've grown up through church, to those who've appeared in from nowhere. And we are hearing those stories. We were just talking about it before we hit record about people who are coming in. They've dabbled in or come from the Islamic faith, from no faith, from a whole variety. Witch talk, manifesting, and kind of tarot cards. And then they bring that in. That's a huge discipleship challenge. I'm excited for it, but it is massive. And we don't have any not many older men ahead who are ready to do the job.
We haven't had these kinds of people coming into our church in our experience and in our lifetimes. These are new challenges coming in. These are the Legions and the Mary Magdalenes. These are not the Nicodemus and the rich young rulers. These are different characters with different needs, and require a different set of skills and a different set of experiences. Are we ready? Do we know what we're doing? A friend of ours, a friend of the podcast, Sarah Williams, go back and listen to her episode at season 4, 3, 4.
No idea.
Brilliant episode. Go and listen to it. She was giving a talk about being human a few years ago, and she reminded us: it's a bridge in Peru? Am I right in thinking it's
a bridge in
Peru?
Haiti? I think it is. The
Yeah, nice.
I've forgotten
Oh
its
yeah, I
name.
set you up to fail there, didn't I? Well done. Takes every now and then. Um,
Choluteca Bridge. Before I even Googled it, I got there. Choluteca.
Congratulations. Anyway, there was a bridge in some Latin American country, and it was wiped out through flooding, and they all spent a load of money to rebuild the bridge. And when they finished rebuilding the bridge, they were all very excited. And then there was another flood or another earthquake or something else. And all of a sudden, the river that this bridge had served moved. So you have a bridge leading literally nowhere, because it no longer actually served anyone to get from one side of a river to another. And the point that Sarah was making in that illustration was that we are very good at building bridges to disciple people coming to faith and coming to Jesus and coming into the church. But often we don't realize that the bridges that we're building no longer go over the rivers of disconnect between the church and the culture that people are coming in from. And so our bridges don't actually lead anywhere or collect anybody from the culture that they're experiencing.
Yeah.
The river has moved. Do we know that? Are we recognizing that the tools that we used to have to disciple people as they come to faith in Jesus are going to need to change to recognize the people that are coming in today?
So all the stats tell us that 90% or so of people come to faith under 18. And we have spent 100 years, to take Sarah's analogy, and we have spent probably billions of pounds investing in a system of evangelizing and discipling young people. And it's actually pretty good at what it was designed to do. But this is a massive shift if all these stats are correct, that people are coming in from outside. We are hearing the stories to back that up, the scale of which we need to understand better. But it is absolutely radically different discipleship than the system that has been built to take people through from 3, 4, 5 years old, camps, youth groups, discipleship programs. This is a very different one. If you've already dabbled in Islam, if you've been looking at witchcraft, if you've been just living life and have a very different frame about what relationships look like, consumerism, individualism, what your life looks like, that's going to be massive. Really exciting, but massive. If you turned up at church via ChatGPT, and we have heard 3 of those stories at least in the last 10, 12 days, that's a big shift.
One of the guys at church turned around and said, have you been coming here long? He's like, no, AI told me to come. And you're like, brilliant, welcome. So yeah, literally, we are seeing it. And the thing is, we should not be surprised that we are seeing this. Depending on which church stream you move in, certainly in my world, consecration has been a theme in the UK church for the last few years. We have been hearing time and time again, God called his church to get ready. Get yourselves ready, get yourselves holy, get yourselves back to me today, because tomorrow I'm going to work miracles amongst you. We shouldn't be surprised that we're starting to see those miracles being worked amongst us, but have we consecrated ourselves? Are we ready? And if we're not, we really need to get on board, because this is a big deal. And we need to come to Jesus. We need to cling to Jesus. We need to look at Jesus to find out what we're going to do, because there is a discipleship deficit, and only he is going to right that balance.
Well, look, yeah, absolutely. We're going to center and look to the Gospels now, because Jesus isn't afraid of the kind of truth encounters that I think we're going to experience some more of in these moments. You know, John 4, brilliant passage where Jesus encounters the woman at the well. It's a compassionate encounter. He's there in the middle of the day when nobody else is going to be there to meet somebody who's marginalized within our community. And he has this wonderful conversation in what probably a matter of minutes or hours that will take us weeks and months. But there is an integrity moment where they have this about her husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. He goes, you're right. The man you're with isn't, you know, you've had 5 husbands. This guy isn't your husband. And there is a kind of integrity, truth encounter, but it's redemptive. What I love is it's always moving towards redemptive. It's not in any way trying to call her out negatively. She runs off and says to everybody in the village, hey, come and see a man who's told me everything I've ever done. Come and see this guy. And there's a redeeming encounter that goes on. And that's the positive side. Look, with somebody like Pilate, he gets so close. And one of my fears, I was talking just before Easter in my own church, is one of my fears in this moment is Pilate knows who Jesus is. Like, he encounters him, but he then says, what is truth? He doesn't really know what truth is. You know, he keeps trying to catch him out. Are you a king? Are you not a king? In John 18. And then there's like, what is truth? And my sort of slight fear in this moment is some people get very close to Jesus. They kind of come through some of these characters, the Rogans and others, and they get close. And there's this wonderful Joe Rogan Wes Huff episode on Joe Rogan's podcast where Huff, this apologist, goes through all these Dead Sea Scroll texts, and then there's this. He goes, "But who's Jesus?" And he keeps asking Rogan. He goes, "An exceptional human being." Yes, but is he more than that? And it's wonderful. It's a really interesting. How do you do apologetics in this moment? And he keeps pushing, but he is asking him like, "Who do you see?" And Rogan's certainly close. He's intrigued, but I hope he gets beyond just being close. That's not enough because there is a discipleship challenge coming. We're going to reframe some of the encounters because Jesus is going to radically change your life. You can see him and say, "Oh, this guy's interesting." That's not what we're aiming for. This is the radical encounter where you lay down your life to Jesus.
I was reading the conversation around Pilate and his encounter with Jesus a couple of weeks ago, and what the little encounter with Pilate's wife was saying. And Pilate's wife warns Pilate, "I don't think you should kill this guy. I don't think you should do what they're asking of you. I've had a dream about him and I feel really uncomfortable about what you're doing." And he doesn't heed her warning. He doesn't know what to do with her prophetic insight. She is not a follower of Jesus. She is not part of that community. She doesn't really know what to do with the dream that she feels that she's had. And yet there is prophetic truth in her story, but it is ignored. Whereas if you take something like what happened to Mary, mother of Jesus, and her encounter with God turning up in her world, because she had a family that also experienced really weird encounters with God and angels, because her cousin Elizabeth was pregnant with John the Baptist, and husband had this encounter with Gabriel in the Holy of Holies as the high priest, and was now mute for the whole time of their pregnancy, which was miraculous in and of itself. Mary knew what to do with her weird encounter with God. There was a community that could support her understanding. And so we start to see in the Gospels, in Jesus' encounters with people and with encounters with the spiritual, if you're part of a community that has narrative, has story, has understanding, that faith starts to make sense and you can start to act it out. If you're not, if you're on your own, it's really easy to miss it and it's really easy to dismiss it. And the consequences of that can be significant. And I think that's a really interesting encounter with what happens when you encounter God, the spiritual, Jesus, and you don't know what to do with it, or you do.
Well, I think there's lots of interesting points in that, isn't it? Dreams. We're hearing more stories about dreams. So Pilate's wife and the dream. The importance of community in that. People are coming to faith on their own. We know that from some of the things we're reading. But then the journey into community is more challenging for them if they've met Jesus off on their own. So they need friends. They need others who are going to invite them in. It's a big step into a church. And look, it's no rocket science from history to know that the discipleship has always been challenging. You look at Judas, who ultimately turns away from Jesus and betrays him. You look at Peter, who denies him but is restored. I mean, John 21, one of my favorite passages on that. I mean, it's just wonderful to see that. So there's always going to be grace in that. But if we were to look for a place that said, well, look, how would you disciple a lot of young men in a really chaotic culture? Well, funnily enough, that's exactly what was happening in the Gospels and in the early church. Because not only is it young men, and not exclusively, because there are women who are absolutely in the community, but we're just intrigued by these stats. But you're also in a very complex culture where you've got Roman occupiers and Jewish leaders and authorities speaking. So you've got this weird mix going on. You've got to navigate something new in a very complex and contested cultural moment, which is why we think the Gospels and leading into the early church is such an interesting place to turn with what we're seeing right now in our culture.
Love it. The birth of the church and those complex discipleship needs, like you said, have always been a part of the story of the church. This has always been true. We've just come out of the Easter season. We have, in the last couple of weeks, remembered what happened when Jesus, as the first fruits of resurrection, comes to life again. And he is met by Mary in the garden where his tomb was, and she mistakes him as a gardener. And John's not in his gospel is not subtle in that moment. He is reminding the reader that this is a new creation. This is a replay of Genesis, of the garden, and the gardener is walking amongst creation again. But it is a new creation in the midst of this one. It's still messy. There's still Rome. There's still past mistakes. There's still hang-ups and shame and guilt and consequence. Everyone with their baggage walks into a new creation with a resurrected Christ. And Jesus is capable of dealing with it. We don't need to be nervous. We don't need to be afraid, but we do need to recognize that there is a new life bursting forward in the midst of this one, and we're invited to join in. It's going to be amazing. So how do we join in, Peter? What does practice look like in a disciple deficit world?
Well, look, I want to bridge in a little on the Acts 2 into the practices because I think it sets us
Okay.
up so well. Just a little bit like, because, classic passage, we know it well, but they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. What are we going to need? We are going to need to do some teaching in this moment. That's fine. Fellowship, as you said, we've got to come together in community. The breaking of bread, we've always talked about communion as one of those practices, but partly it's the one thing in that I think is really interesting. There's an increased interest in Eastern Orthodox, in Catholic, in Pentecostal. There's an increased interest in the weird. And communion is weird. We're used to it on the inside, but it's a weird thing to say what we're going to do there. And to prayer, they were filled with signs, filled with awe, the signs and wonders. Again, the supernatural element of that, and then having things in common. So there's the sharing and the compassion in that, and they're gathering together. There's hospitality, generosity. I mean, literally, you could have a field day. Every one of them's listed there, but it is a real reminder of the things that are going to help disciple and practices in these moments. I suppose, look, I'll pick one thing to jump out there is like the worship idea, which I think just takes us out of ourselves in this moment in a kind of very individually orientated society. It's a communal activity. It raises our heads up. It leads us out. It's full bodied. It's engaged. That could be sung worship. That can be part of acts of communion. There's ways in which we engage in that will look different for each of us. But I think worship does take us in a different direction in this moment. We did write about it a little bit in the book. It always reminds me, we do have a book on these matters, but it is about like reorientating ourselves in different ways. And you can dig into the book to find out a little bit more about some of the things we say. But like, be it listening to music, be it taking a psalm and working our way through some of those, be it going outside and walking, getting inspired by nature in these moments, be it worshiping together with other people, soaking worship. Like, people do this in so many different ways, but I think that's a great way to take us beyond ourselves in this moment, to be comfortable inhabiting the kind of slightly weird and different way of doing things. And also remembering it's actually not that weird. We do it in many other ways. We're happy to go to a sports event or a music concert and get fully into this. But you're like, what does it look like to reorientate it beyond ourselves, up and out?
So good. Taking our crown off, taking ourselves off the throne of our lives and putting God back in the centrifugal force of the universe, of our world, of creation, but certainly of our lives. What does submission look like in this space? How do we say, not my will, but yours be done, Jesus, as an act of worship? Or really simply, the discipline of every day declaring, choose this day who you will serve. As for me and my household, I'm going to serve the Lord. If that's our starting point, if that's our practice to reorientate, what does it mean to serve the Lord today? We will do a huge amount of reformation in our discipleship, of coming away from some of the cultural stories that say it's all about us, it's all about our looks, it's all about our success, it's all about what we want, it's all about what we think is the right thing to do. If we're choosing to serve the Lord today and we're going to worship him above all else, so much comes into space. I think for me, I will really want to pull on that Mary idea that if you're coming to faith, you need to be in a community. One of the pieces of research that is coming out from the EA in the next couple of months about people coming to faith in adulthood, really key indication of some of the struggles of new faith is how ostracized people felt from that old community, because their life has changed, their life has been transformed. The things that they used to do, they no longer do. The way they used to act, they no longer act. And there is a grief there. The people that they have spent their lives knowing, there's a disconnect. if there isn't a community that will come and welcome and be hospitable and say, no, it's okay, we've got you, we understand what you're going through, we understand what you believe, and we're going to support you. If there isn't a community for those people to plug into, they're going to find life really hard. So if you're coming to faith, find community. If people are coming to faith in your midst, open your community up. Be a practicing, hospitable community that says, welcome, we get you're weird, because we're weird too, and it's okay. That will do a huge amount to help people ask questions and understand the experiences that they're now having, and some of the consequences of some of the decisions that they have now made.
Yeah, and I think those two, as you've said, are deeply linked. The worship and community piece. The one other one I'll throw in the mix is that digital abstinence. Again, something we talk about in the book, and part of that is, again, it's kind of essentially breaking the hold that culture has over us, given the vibe shift, given what's going on, the pros and the cons of that, but the different way it's moving, the speed at which it's moving. It is incredibly easy. And at times it is important to be aware of that, but it's very easy for that to start to shape things, that to become the primary lens, and that your day is driven by a Supreme Court decision. Either way, your day is driven by what your workplace or business has instituted as a new policy, or the latest round of tariffs, or whatever it might be. And it might be the comedy aspect of that, it might be the serious aspect of that. But our lives are shaped by the shorts, the reels. We were just talking about even beforehand. We're aware of that as people who work in this space, and we put things out there, and we're interested in how people engage in them. And so we're all interested in the kind of likes and the shaping of the digital world and the stories that it tells us. So coming off that, monitoring our screen time, setting limits. All my things now have limits that kick in after 15 minutes. Now, it doesn't mean they automatically shut off. I can override them. I'm not naive to think that I can't do that, but it makes me think and do it. And it's even just setting down the devices. Where do you put them at night? It's the basic things we've talked about sometimes before, but we need to re-emphasize them and say, are we off it for a day? Do we take seasons away? Do we just put it on our computer so you have to intentionally go to get onto certain platforms? Each of us have tried different things in different seasons, but it's being alert to and being aware of it, and then putting some action into place depending on where our start point is, how we need to monitor and limit that.
Yeah, it's that idea of who are the voices speaking into your life and who has primacy. So the practice in the morning of coming before Jesus at the start of your day, because the most important thing is to every day hear God say, remember who you are. You are a child of God. You are a co-heir with Christ. You are a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. These are the starting points. These are the foundations of your day. Is that the first voice you're hearing? Or do you immediately take the phone from under your pillow and start scrolling, check the news, check your updates, check your emails? Are those the voices that are coming in and shaping and framing you? Can you get offline and open your ears to hear the word of God speak truth into your life before you go off and live it? Digital abstinence is a key idea. So we love hearing stories of people who are encountering these ideas, these concepts, these practices. Please get in touch. We want to hear from you. beinghuman@eauk.org is the best email, but you can obviously, having just told everybody to get offline, stalk us on most social media platforms. We will be around, but probably not first thing in the morning. You can find us on YouTube, on your podcast platform of choice. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. We would love to hear some reviews. They really help get the word out there about this podcast and what we're up to. If you like us and you like our content, keep in regular touch with us. You can subscribe to our email at beinghumanlens.com. Follow us on socials. But until next time, take care. God bless. We'll catch you soon.